Good morning. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski with Children Come First. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. And this morning, as usual, we're talking about schools and children. And today we're going to talk about safe environments for children. And I'll tell you what that means in a few moments. We're here with Bob Kobert from the Conservation Consultants Incorporated in Pittsburgh. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Good morning, Daria. How are you?
Weathering the storm here, this snowstorm we're having. Tell us a little bit about Conservation Consultants Incorporated.
Conservation Consultants Incorporated, Daria, is a nonprofit organization. It's been around for over 25 years. Its roots really are in combining its interest in environmental education with environmental stewardship, and more recently, how you can combine those things for economic opportunity. It has a very strong interest in things like sustainable design and development, green schools, green neighborhoods. It's involved in a variety of programs with weatherization, low-income advocacy for people who have difficulty paying the utility bills, and several programs are related to that.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am an architect by profession, a member of the AIA. I have a lot of interest in the kind of work that CCI is doing because I was in practice for 22 years dealing with people with multiple chemical sensitivities, where I try to combine my interest in energy conservation with the built environment and the health issues that you alluded to at the beginning of the show. And I sit here as Director of Green Building Services trying to shepherd CCI's interest in the built environment and how that relates to our general well-being.
Now, why is it important to understand environments with respect to people's health?
I think there's a growing interest in this for all the right reasons. We are the only species that we know of that can alter its environment faster than we can adapt to it. The root of that has resulted in the fact that our environments, and the built environment is where we spend 80 or 90% of our time, has a profound impact on our well-being, our general well-being. And we know now that by paying attention to our built environments, our offices, homes, our schools, we can only benefit by that in terms of how we feel and how productive we are and how we go about our daily lives. And that's really why the awareness, I think, is growing about how important a built environment is and what that can do to our health.
How does this specifically relate to children?
It's critical in that children, as we know, have far less developed immune systems. They're much more vulnerable than we are as adults. Oftentimes, Daria, as you can appreciate, they have far fewer choices about where they can go and where they can live and the schools that they can occupy and the places where they spend their time and so forth. And when you combine how vulnerable children are to the environment and the fact that they can seldom escape it voluntarily, I think we have to be really especially cognizant of the environments and the places where our children spend our time and how they interact with those environments.
All right. What specifically is a Pittsburgh Green Neighborhood Initiative?
The Green Neighborhood Initiative here in Pittsburgh it's really a multifaceted program that has to do with restructuring or rebuilding our urban neighborhoods from the standpoint of combining environmental stewardship, as I mentioned earlier, Daria, with economic opportunity. We're working in the built environment in homes and places of worship, our schools, businesses, and so forth, but we're also concerned with things like green spaces, open space, environmental education, and how we can simply structure or rebuild our neighborhoods to be better places using environmental design or environmental criteria as one of the major drivers of the program. And as part of that, we're working with things like getting lead out of buildings, improving the interior air quality of our structures, waste stream issues, and things that relate to a multi-faceted list of environmental issues that can make our communities better.
How does that equate, for example, why would people want to worry about the environmental stewardship? Why is that important? Most people really don't care because they don't feel that it affects them directly. How can we get people to care about this issue?
I think one of the things that's surprising us, and it really is surprising us, this program has been on now since April of 1995. We believe that when we go out in the communities, what we're hearing, and we don't solicit this necessarily, these are comments that we get voluntarily from people, whether they know it intuitively or whether they've been reading more about it, Daria, or what have you, what we talk about really are quality of life issues. Almost invariably, when we go into neighborhoods, they're concerned about security, about their open space, parks, trash, recycling. Parents are keenly interested in community schools and what that means to their children and the quality of life in their communities. They are just as interested, of course, in things like jobs and what it means for them to be able to hold on to their homes and so forth. But when you tell them that we can reduce their energy bills by half and they can do what they want with that discretionary income, I can assure you that they sit up and they take notice. When we go into schools and work in high-performance schools or green schools, it generates a tremendous amount of interest from the parents because parents care about their kids. Parents care about what's going on in the schools, whether as taxpayers or as parents. It's all the same. They want the best for their children. They want the best for their community. I think you're right in that the old perceptions of environmentalism was about saying no to everything. And certainly I can assure you, in Pittsburgh, we had issues of environment versus jobs and steel going down and a lot of other things. But those things now are dissolving. We're talking simply about quality of life, better environments, healthier kids. And when you put it on that level, people do care about it and they do respond to it.
What kinds of health risks are we taking with regard to our children? What kinds of things let's get to specifics here about what you're talking about so that people in our listening audience have a grasp of the kinds of problems and issues that, or even illnesses that are related to the environment with regard to their children or that their children might be suffering from.
Okay, that ranges, of course, with regard to where we're talking about and the age of our children and so forth, but basically it falls into where we live, which is obvious, our homes. And once more, certainly since the 70s, we have gathered an incredible body of literature regarding the health issues of our homes. And that has everything to do from the interior air quality that is caused by having deleterious, dangerous things in our home, whether it be chemicals, volatile organic compounds, house poisons, cleaning fluids, a lot of the things that have to do with detergents, radon, all the common allergens that we find in domestic environments that can affect children, as well as the things I mentioned already. Lead, especially in urban environments and older housing stock, is a very, very serious issue. It's very well documented. It extends to other things that have to do with children's well-being, whether it be from renovations, remodeling, dry cleaning fluids. And I don't want to be a doomsday sayer about it or be completely negative about it. A lot of parents are very cognizant about keeping clean, healthy homes. But the fact of the matter is that in the aggregate, the total situation is that there are a lot of things that we take for granted that we don't know about that are in our homes that can affect our children's health. If you look at the other side of the equation, where our young people go to school, and that's K through 12, college and beyond, actually. I'm just talking about school buildings in general. We're confronted with the same thing. There is a tremendous amount of literature out now on what is going on in our schools, whether it be from pesticides, herbicides, disinfectants, the issues of food service, how we clean our schools, all the things that come into the schools, Daria, in terms of art supplies and our contracts and procurements and maintenance. And I could go on about how we maintain our lawns and our school grounds and so forth. But once more, in the aggregate, it is a fact, it's a well-known fact, that some of our country schools are simply not healthy places to be. And that's driven a whole new awareness of what healthy schools can be and what we should be doing in these environments.
What kinds of symptoms are reflected in the children?
That's a very interesting question because actually when you talk about sick building syndrome or sick schools, building-related illness, these diseases, these reactions exhibit exactly the same symptoms as flu-like diseases do. That is to say that these children often exhibit irritated eyes, runny nose, their ears are ringing, they're flush, they might be lethargic, tired, muscle aches and pains, things that exhibit very, very similar to bacteriologically induced or virologically induced illness. In other words, conventional illness that we know accurately as the flu. But there's a saying that we have, and it's a sad saying of sorts, in that if Johnny or Joanna's had the flu for the last 5 years, it's not the flu. It's something else. And with the emergence of clinical ecology and with the growing awareness in the occupational medicine field about environmental medicine, we're now beginning to separate out these symptoms and know that these could just as easily be induced from things like floor wax and cleaning agents and other things that are in our school buildings that are chemically based that our school children are reacting to, even though the symptoms are very, very similar.
You talked very quickly. You called them a couple of different kinds of illnesses. Did you call it sick school?
Well, the sick building syndrome, again, which was coined in the 70s, and building-related illness, one, I guess, precipitates the other. If we have a, quote, sick building, unquote, a building that's not conducive to our general well-being, then we suffer from building-related illnesses. And the two things are closely related. And frankly, I stand corrected, they are often interchanged in conversation, Daria, but they're talking really about the same thing, how sick buildings impact the building occupants and what that means in terms of the illnesses that precipitate from being in buildings that are not healthy places to be.
Does this affect learning?
It definitely affects learning. There is, once more, the good thing about being in the year 2000 is that there's so much work being done on how the built environment affects our children that we're moving from the anecdotal into the clinically verifiable, statistically significant area where we can make definite relations between the environment that children are in and how they perform, whether it be SAT scores, simple things like absenteeism, literally just their ability to come to school and to sustain themselves and to be awake and bright and so forth. There are several people who have dedicated the body of their life, literally, to researching how school environments impact children's performance as students, and the work is really impressive. So I think it's very safe to say that our physical environment definitely affects how we perform, and school children are certainly no exception to that.
What are high-performance schools? What did you mean by that?
High-performance schools, Daria, are schools and school systems, and I want to be very clear about including school systems in this conversation. High-performance school systems look at the ecological footprint of doing business as a school system on the environment and the communities where the schools reside. And on a large scale, on a macro scale, this has to do with things like contracts and procurement and the food service and waste stream management and things that the schools engage in, and whether they do that with an environmental bent, whether they put all of those services that they provide and things that they purchase or buy, their school supplies, art supplies, cleaning supplies, office supplies, maintenance regimens, all those things on a macro scale are taken into account and examined in terms of ecology, human ecology and building ecology, and how they relate. And we're finding that that's actually profitable. There's no reason why this has to be any more expensive. As a matter of fact, school systems run ecologically can actually be running less expensively, more frugally, and more profitably. On a micro scale, it has to do literally with pilot schools that we're doing, where we look at specific schools and all that entails, specific sites and playgrounds and bus service and the physical condition of the schools, the building systems, Daria, lighting, ventilation, heating, cooling, whether or not children have access to views, how they relate to their outside environment, the nature of recess. It's a very, very comprehensive program, but by and large, what we're trying to do is really look at those three things: human ecology and what's good for us because we occupy those schools, children, staff, principals, administration, and so forth. building ecology, because buildings have a life. How they're created, how they're maintained, the energy that goes through them, material and nutrient flows that go through them, and also the natural environment, because all these things impact the natural environment, whether it's a matter of where we get our material and supplies, how far away our food comes from, are we supporting local agriculture. And so high-performance schools look at all those things for the betterment of everything and everyone associated with the business of education.
Wow. Probably the most imperative question that I'm sure are on people's minds. First of all, let me tell them that we are here at Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT, 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m., and we're here today with Bob Kobert, CCI, Conservation Consultants Incorporated, and we're talking about school systems, environmental systems. And you know that's, Bob, that's a subject near and dear to my heart, which
Indeed.
is school systems. Now, I'm sure that in our listening audience's mind, they're thinking about dollars and cents. And how does this equate in dollars and cents in terms of redesigning the school? Can you redesign a school system, its internal physical and external physical system, without putting a lot of money into it? And how does that work? And how does the dollar and cents of that equate?
We believe that we can do it, Daria. We believe that we are doing it. And I can assure you, and I would certainly comfort your listeners in the fact that we're not the only people that are doing this. That's really the good news. This is something that's going on nationwide. It's going on in Europe. We're learning a lot of lessons from our colleagues elsewhere around the globe about how to operate our school systems much more environmentally sound, much more economically sound. These things have wonderful compatibilities, and I'll give you some specific examples. We know, for instance, Daria, that school systems, and this isn't anything that people do deliberately, it's just the habits we fall into and the way that things evolve over time. It's quite common, for instance, that school systems really don't talk interdepartmentally. The food service folks don't know what the waste stream people are up against, or the people managing curriculums aren't always cognizant of emerging trends in environmental education, or school board superintendents who are concerned about dollars and cents issues of overall school board maintenance aren't always in touch with a teacher who is down in the trenches and delivering the services every day to a third grader. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at the school system holistically, and I know that that's a worn-out word, but I really can't think of a better one. When you look at the school system holistically, we find that it's just a matter of how the money sloshes around. And school systems, number one, are really waking up to the fact that they are an economic force in and of themselves. If they want healthy cleaning products at a competitive price, they can go out and they can get those healthy cleaning products at a competitive price. If they want to re-examine how their food service is done in order to minimize waste streams and so forth, they know now that there are food catering services out there that will deliver that service based on their environmental criteria at a competitive price. So you start to see issues of the environment merging with economical issues. There's another side of it, however, and I'm sure you are very familiar with this, and I know, and because I've had conversations with you before, Daria, regarding your expertise and your background, there is an incredible body of knowledge emerging now about the issues of productivity in our schools, our workplaces, and it points to the fact that if you are diligent about the environment in the schools, and if they are healthy environments with good interior air quality and so on, and that is marketed as a good school to be in, school teachers want to work in healthy schools. It becomes a competitive market. Absenteeism is costly. If you can reduce absenteeism, you're going to save money. There are issues now emerging in the insurance industries, in carriers that are looking at environmental quality with regard to premiums that they will pay in health and coverage and so forth. So school systems that are looking at environmental issues that deal specifically with what you are talking about in your profession, Daria, health, integrated systems, curriculum, and so forth, are benefiting from a number of ways, both real and, or I should say, first-line, secondary, tertiary benefits across the board: administration, healthcare coverage, substitute teacher costs, supplies, operation and maintenance. And once more, the good news is it's a win-win situation. Better environmental stewardship at very competitive costs, and the kids win. And that's something that's very difficult to walk away from, and it's something that is really getting across to the school superintendents who are looking at the fact that they have to save money, they have to be more competitive, and it's just completely exhilarating to us that the environment is where they're going to really to meet these challenges.
Well, as you know, I started one of the first environmentally friendly stores in the United States, wholesale retail, and one of the options that I had was to go into the classrooms and inform. This was long before environmental issues ever cropped up in the mainstream, and I went into classrooms to talk about environmental issues, and it occurred to me that with having the environment as an issue in the classroom or as a class or as a part of the curriculum, in fact, nothing was being integrated by the students because they would go out and there wasn't recycling in the school itself, or the people in the cafeteria weren't ecologically informed, weren't using their products properly, or and the cleaning staff wasn't involved in it. So it has to be a systematic approach, not just a course taught in school. It's a way of life we're actually talking about here.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'd really like your observations on this. I hope that they concur with ours. We have found when we do programs, Daria, like the Green Neighborhood Initiatives, where we really work with energy conservation issues, resource issues, composting, block gardens, community gardens, and look at the role of the school in those communities. And I think you'll agree, sadly, that for whatever reasons, busing, political reasons, there are a lot of urban situations, certainly, where schools are no longer the social icon or the community anchor that they used to be. And I'm not saying that about all schools or all communities. I'm sure that there's some intense pride in neighborhood schools that's still out there, and we need to build on that. But what we have found across the board is that kids resonate with this stuff. They're interested in it. They get it. It excites them. They like to work with it. They enjoy the projects. They feel good about doing it. And the best thing that we found is that kids take this stuff home. They put the pressure on the parents, and they start asking those same questions that you just alluded to. Hey, Mom, why aren't we doing this? Hey, Dad, isn't there a better way of getting there? And so on and so forth. And those indicators are real, Daria, and they show up in our program evaluations that school children, given the opportunity, grasp this stuff, they enjoy it, they like to work with it, and they take it home. And I think there's a message there in and of itself.
Well, I've known for years, since the late 1940s, that corporate America has long held beliefs, and their marketing strategies have always been that if you go to the schools first, you not only get lifelong consumers, but you also get children who convince their parents of the same.
I would certainly agree, yes.
And so rather than trying to sell products here, we're trying to redesign our thinking and our awareness and our habits to something better, and who better to do that than children encouraging adults as well.
There's another aspect of your question, if I may, because I'm one who is fascinated by the connections between things. You said the connections between human ecology, building ecology, natural ecology, the connections between industry and science, what have you. And because of our relationship to folks like the U.S. Green Building Council, the American Institute of Architects, Committee on the Environment, just the other organizations, Dario, that we interface with on a regular basis, as you probably know, there's a growing movement nationwide in things like green buildings, and companies as diverse as Lockheed, the Body Shop, Boeing, the greening of the White House, 3M Company, the 12-step folks, the natural step folks, they're grasping these same concepts of environmental stewardship and economic opportunity because it's making them more competitive, more secure, opening other markets, what have you. And We have found in Pittsburgh, believe it or not, and Pittsburgh still has quite a number of Fortune 500 companies that, as you suggested correctly, are interested in schools, Daria. These folks serve on various school boards, various community organizations, and whatnot. They're very visible. They are bringing this same message from their workplace to the schools. Hey, there's a better way to manage this. Look, why aren't we doing this more ecologically? The physical environment should be an extension of the curriculum, just like our physical office building is an extension of our portfolio as a company. And it's been very interesting to me to see these things blend together, wherein school boards and school administrators are actually getting some guidance from the business community about how to do business. And I find this very encouraging, and to me it speaks to how solid these concepts really are and how good these ideas are.
I want to step a step backwards here. Well, let's continue with this conversation. We were going on with how community involvement, you're involving the community and you're involving business and corporations, and sometimes that puts up a red flag for me, because a lot of times in the past, and for at least this last century, business and industry has involved itself in the school for personal and gain here, and as well as corporate gain. So I have a little bit of misgivings about the corporations coming in and telling schools how to operate. We don't want, in my estimation, and this is a little off the subject of environment, but we do want efficient schools, but not to the detriment of learning and taking care of the needs of children. I think there are two kinds of factions here. One is the school is an administrative function and as a managerial function, and two is as learning and imparting knowledge. And I think those are two separate factions that we have to deal with.
I wouldn't refute that. We divide it down into two categories ourselves. One is the physical environment, the buildings and things that we're talking about that enclose the functions of learning or the activities of learning. And the other side, frankly, is the people issues. And we look at that as the culture of learning, or the culture of the folks doing these providing the services, once more, of administering the teaching lessons, administrators, principals, faculty, what have you. I was alluding to the fact that here in Pittsburgh, Daria, and I'm looking at this largely as a constructive thing. I'm not refuting what you're saying in terms of, hey, do we want American corporations running businesses of the classroom, or bringing their products in, or what have you, as in exchange for support. But I'll give you a specific example. In Pittsburgh, for instance, we have the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank. It just put up a brand new high-performance green building in terms of its mission and what it's trying to do. They now have hooked up with the schools, or actively working with the schools in terms of retrieving food that would otherwise be wasted and distributing that to people, Daria, who have nothing to eat. Now, I see that as a business, as an organization that has an environmental mission, which is going into the schools, minimizing waste, maximizing return, and helping folks that otherwise wouldn't be helped. It doesn't necessarily impact the school lunch program or who's paying for things, or even necessarily what the kids are eating, although I have to share with you as a parent, I wish it would. But there's some additional benefits there because the schools are starting to link into the community. There's others in that where the endowments and foundations, and one, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which normally hooks up with private companies or other places of the city to provide gardens and other beautification efforts, that are now partnering with us to go into and redoing asphalt and concrete playgrounds and making them much more beautiful, much more ecologically sensitive places to be. And those folks have some real hardcore business people on their boards and so forth, but they are able to cobble together programs that I think are benefiting and beautifying our schools, that are working really very much in concert with environmental issues, where frankly, if those people didn't step up, Daria, and volunteer their time and give some guidance to the schools, I don't know if those programs would be implemented. And so in that regard, at least, I would side on getting, let's say, strategic or well-founded interest in the schools that are benefiting the kids. And beyond that, I probably have the same concerns that you do. I would want to know why these folks are interested, what are you doing here, and really what's your mission. And I would agree with you.
You're listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and we're visiting with Bob Kobert. We're here at 7:50 a.m. WAAT on your radio dial every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m.
We're here with Bob Kobert,
and we are talking about ecological systems in the schools. We'll be back for our second half hour. Please join us. We'd like you to come back, and if you'd like information, you can call us at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS, or visit us on our email site at PROKIDS@rlc.net.
What are the Pittsburgh High Performance Schools Partnership all about?
It's a very interesting partnership, Daria.
And if you'd like to reach Bob Kobert and anything we're talking about today, you can reach him at 412-431-4449, extension 225. That's 412-431-4449, extension 225. Please join us for our second half hour, and we'll be talking about the ecology of our schools, ecology systems, and join us while we listen to our sponsors. Thank you.
And we kept hearing the same thing. Well, you know, Bob, if it's okay with the secretary, it's okay with me. If it's okay with the superintendent, it's okay with me. And so we literally went to the Pittsburgh superintendent, who at the time was Louise Brennan, and we were prepared, Daria, with all our books about sick schools and absenteeism and learning disabilities and Ritalin in the classroom and everything. And we got about 5 minutes into that, and she pushed all the stuff back across the table and said, "Look, Bob, I know about these problems. I can't do a whole lot about it. I don't have the time, the resources, or the person power to put on this. But if you'd like to help us, all I can really do is make sure that my staff listens to you and attends the meetings." And she kept her promise. And from that, 5 years later, we now have the Pittsburgh High Performance School Partnership. And we have grown from our 3 or 4 primary partners, which were the Heinz Endowments here in Pittsburgh, the utility companies that are providing energy services to the schools, the water companies and so forth, Daria, as well as the couple I just mentioned, the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Giant Eagle, which is a major supermarket chain here. We now have over 40 strategic partners that are helping us make our schools a better place. And 2 very important things have happened. One is that we were able to grow a partnership with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection on a state level. And here in the Commonwealth, we're riding the bow wave, really, of the governor's Growing Greener initiative, where we are greening the business practices of the state, department by department, including the Department of Education here in the Commonwealth. So these things have great interest on a state level. Secretary Hickok has given us his full support and a formal letter of agreement and support for the Pittsburgh High Performance School Partnership. And we've been able in the last 5 years, Daria, to get to the point where we're actually influencing policy on a state level. In other words, ecological design in schools in the Commonwealth. In Pittsburgh, the major indicator for us is that I'm very happy to say that we were recently involved in Pittsburgh issuing its first RFP, or request for proposals, for its first green school, which is going to be a green school from the bottom up, top to bottom in terms of all the things we've been talking about, within which we're interested in looking at, and we are looking at, all of the various ways that we can align environmental stewardship, interior air quality, human ecology issues in the schools with the needs and the benefits to our children if we do these things. So that's sort of an overview. We're working in 4 pilot schools right now. That's going to grow significantly in the next funding cycle, where we're going to expand these programs into other schools in the city. And as you might suspect, the Pittsburgh High Performance School Partnership, Daria, has attracted interest in other communities and in neighboring Ohio and West Virginia. And so we're sort of exporting this model to other school systems that are doing the same sort of work. We could spend hours talking about specifics, and I'd be happy to address those if you have them. But that's really what it is. It's a 2-part program. One part has drifted the whole way up to Harrisburg, our state capital, and the other one is very much down in the trenches, where we're retrofitting schools and working with curriculum in specific schools in the Pittsburgh school system.
Now, how do you assist schools that are, now you're talking about us building a sustainable school from the ground up, but how do you redesign a school that already exists?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question also, in that one of the reasons why the first green neighborhood in Pittsburgh was Carrick, which is, again, an urban neighborhood, is because they have the largest high school in the city of Pittsburgh, Carrick High School, which at the time was slated for a $25 million renovation. And through the support of the Heinz Endowments, we were able to actually intercede constructively, benevolently intercede in that design process with the architects. The architects are Hayes Large here in Pittsburgh. And when we first got involved, quite frankly, it was a bit of a rub. You know, hey, Bob, what are you doing here? We're already underway. This renovation has begun. But the more we talked and the more support we were able to garner, and frankly, the more public awareness for the process that was generated, the more willing and the more excited the architects became about working on the projects. And in that same process then, Daria, and over the last few years, we've been able to input through the school system, because like almost all school systems, Pittsburgh has a facilities department and an energy department and so forth. And we've literally been able to go in department by department and talk to those folks and green them, make them aware of these issues. We have done that, to answer your question, by showing examples of things that other people are doing and running the numbers and showing the bottom line benefits of what other people are doing, using other models, other examples, other specifics in terms of everything from relamping to changing out cleaning products and so on. In the aggregate, in the total, we've been able to literally, over 5 years, educate people in the design community, Daria, in the administration, in the rank and file of the teachers, in the unions, to just why this is the right thing to do. And systematically then, it's just a matter of the chronology. We've had enough time winning confidence, educating folks, partnering with them, winning some small wins, some quick victories that we were able to post, to where now we're not only working with the new school that's being done, but we're working with some significant renovation projects and consulting on various aspects of schools that aren't necessarily being renovated. We work with Steve Ashkin, for instance, from Rochester, Midland, who came down and educated the school system on the merits of healthy cleaning products and why we should be getting toxins out of the maintenance regimens of schools. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's a physical renovation going on. We're not building a new library wing or a new computer classroom, but we are, in fact, making positive changes in the schools systematically. And that's what the program's about.
One of the problems that I have in any environment are these fluorescent lights. I feel sometimes like they suck all the energy out of me before I even start working. I'm hoping that we can do something, but I noticed when my children were in school that one of the teachers had fluorescent lights stands all over the classroom and chose not to use had incandescent lights and chose not to use the fluorescent lights. I have a problem here that I want to talk to you about. First of all, I'd like to extend an invitation to you. The next time you're in Harrisburg, please give me a call.
I will.
I'd like you to meet with legislators with me, because one of my concerns is that the problem that we have in what we are doing in the state of Pennsylvania is the fact that we are not training architects as well as laborers in our vocational schools to understand the ecological issues in building. And one of the things that I would like to see in this state is to transform the vocational schools to ecologically sound principles within, and to train our electricians, our carpenters, our plumbers, all of those in ways that are commensurate with the report that came out of the governor's office on the reforms that need to be done. Because I don't even think, bulldozer experts, really, people don't think about things as they are doing them. We are trained in all these old systems, mechanical systems of building, and we aren't training our students to think in those ways as well. And I think it's critical for the next century. Perhaps Pennsylvania will be the first state to design vocational schools that are ecologically sound.
I think you're going to see some very encouraging developments come to fruition in fairly short order. And I'm not making light of your concern, because you know that you and I have talked about this, and I agree with you. At the same time, let's just take just a moment, Daria, and look at how your concerns are being addressed. Once more, it's encouraging to me, frankly, that the Department of Education in Harrisburg is teaming in meaningful ways for the first time in quite a long while with the Department of General Services, with DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and so forth. Reading the specifications, I was flattered to be able to be the principal author on the high-performance green building guidelines for the Commonwealth. We are going to see the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania join the U.S. Green Building Council, which is a first for that organization. And the end result here is that we are beginning the move towards ecological building in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as policy, and that includes schools. So let's just pause for a moment and appreciate what that eventually could mean if we stay on this course, and as taxpayers we insist on these things and we vote for them, and we put the pressure on the legislators that you're referring to make sure that these things are simply followed through. Secondarily, without any influence from any kind of government, Daria, whether it be federal, state, local, municipal, what have you, there are some very interesting programs going on. We're involved in one in particular where we are blending vocational education activities in the Pittsburgh City schools and bringing them online in a more mainstream sense using green building, believe it or not, as a catalyst for that, where vocational education schools are going out into the community, renovating properties and bringing them back online and the tax rolls and so forth. The instructors are using green building principles to teach the kids, and you might be interested to know that one of the reasons these programs are being driven is because there are so many major projects going up in our region, from a new green convention center to 2 major financial venues to green schools, where contractors, developers, and builders are now asking for employees who have green building skills. And so we're actually starting to see a little bit of a ripple in the job market, where in the construction industry, and you know what this means in terms of vocational training, people are starting to ask for these skills. So what do you know about green construction? What do you know about green building? And the market is actually driving itself here. Now, again, in the aggregate, you have a state government that is advocating green building, including green schools. You have people like the Grable Foundation and the Heinz Foundation, the Rockefeller Brother Foundation, and folks that I'm sure you are personally familiar with, who want to see the greening of curriculums, including vocational education training. And in our case, we have a wonderful opportunity where we're trying to bring traditional education and vocational education together, and we're using environmental interests and environmental concerns as a catalyst to bring them together, including greening curriculums. So I don't know. I guess, like we say around here, if you're into what we are doing, what you are doing, Daria, personally, and what we're doing here at CCI, if you're into it for instant gratification, we're probably going to be very frustrated people. But I really am encouraged in the long term that we're going to see much of what interests both of us for the sake of the kids. And I'm living for that, and that's what we're working towards.
You're listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, 7:50 a.m. WAAT on your radio dial. I'm here today with Bob Kobert from the Conservation Consultants Incorporated from Pittsburgh, and we're talking about high-performance schools with relationship to the environment. And I was musing, which is why I stuttered a little bit. You talked about the market driving the need, except that I know in general in schools it is very difficult, even though market-driven needs place an impact on the school. Unless you get everyone on the same page and talk to everyone and work with everyone, it takes a very, very long period of time to have this filtered down because of the nature of the pyramidal structure, the administrative structure of schools. So my offer to you to come and speak with legislators is because I have several people on the education committee that I've been speaking to say, hey, let's start moving on this, let's start talking about it, let's start working with, because they have an impact in speaking with the superintendents of the 501 superintendents around the state. And I think rather not just having legislation, but dialogue about these issues really needs to get to the places where it needs to get to, so that we're not, often those of us who are not within the schools don't have the ability to filter down the information to the principals and teachers as well as other people in the schools. And I think that we can work together in terms of doing that kind of information letting.
I would be delighted. And thank you in advance for that opportunity. Any time that we can get an audience with these folks, it behooves us all to do it. I would share another interesting psychology, though, with you, Daria. And again, I'd like your impression of this or your opinion on this. What also seems to happen when you do get an audience with a school board superintendent or the folks that, like we're talking about in Orange and outside the Commonwealth and, around the rest of the country, they know because of their particular journals, because of the newsletters that they receive, because of the conference circuit that these people attend in their own lives as education professionals and so on, that the issue of green schools is emerging. And I'm not saying, between you and I, that it's emerging quickly enough or that these people are taking it seriously enough. I'm not saying that. But we do know that when we are able to sit down and show people, for instance, the 5-minute video that was on CNN about daylit schools and what the impact of daylighting is. And that's my response, by the way, to your question about fluorescent lighting. First, let's maximize daylighting, for heaven's sakes, and get back into the art of daylighting our buildings the way we used to, and then start talking about color and chroma and temperature of lamps and full spectrum artificial lighting schemes and so forth. But
well, we can't go about knocking out all the walls immediately.
No, we can't. But we can certainly stop making the mistakes that we have made for so long, and go back to the skills that we used to have as designers and contractors and building better schools. But my point is that the psychology that interests me is that once a school board sees that you can actually daylight a school for as much money or less and get the returns on productivity and absenteeism and so forth, then they're very, very inclined to do it if the numbers work. And more, we're seeing examples, as-built examples, where the statistics are proven, the budget was met, there was no extension in time, the students are happy, and maybe most significantly, the teachers want to work in those kinds of buildings. And so we're getting a very interesting response to the issue of green schools from teachers and teachers' unions. And these are the kinds of things I think will swing it in our favor. At least I hope so, because they are the right thing to do, and they need not cost any more if they're done correctly.
Listen, before this program is over, I want to diverge a little bit, and I know that every time I talk to you, you're in an airplane somewhere going to Europe or Africa, or what are you doing in Europe and Africa, and what's happening in those countries that I'm assuming it's related to the school issue?
Yes, it is, and again, it shouldn't surprise anyone that these issues are global. There are schools around the world. I can assure you that where we're working in the Czech Republic and in Poland, the people feel every bit as interested and passionate about their schools and their children and the well-being of their children as we do here. And I can assure you also, and this shouldn't surprise you, I know it won't surprise you or many of your listeners, that the European countries that we're working in, and a lot of the ones that we're not, who we're collaborating with and learning from, are way ahead of us on so many issues in terms of the built environment and the quality of the built environment, including schools, that we have an awful lot to learn from them.
What countries are those?
Excuse me?
What countries
are? Oh, my gosh. Germany is way ahead of us on these things. The Scandinavian countries have a much greater appreciation of interior air quality and furnishing systems, daylighting. The Czech Republic and Poland are making major investments in terms of a shift away from the last 50 years, certainly, as of 1989 and beyond, and collaborating with people in the European theater working towards green neighborhoods, which is why we're over there, and specifically healthier schools. In one instance, we were over to observe Roland Seeger, a German architect, Daria, who does amazing ecologically sound playgrounds. He's done over 800 of these playgrounds in Europe which just in themselves are a whole new way of looking at how kids interact with their environment and what that means to the surrounding school sites, and how we build schools relative to the property and the land that we build them on. And so there's an awful lot of very innovative, very interesting things going on in schools over there. In Africa, we are working on an environmental interpretation and healing center in Rwanda, of all places. And as you know, Rwanda has a very sad recent history where there were clashes and divisions over there, and they're actually looking to build a school, an environmental learning and interpretation center that will act as a catalyst for healing a lot of the cultural conflicts and wounds that have taken place over in Rwanda in the last 5-6 years. So these things are global. Children are global, and these concerns are certainly not specific just to the United States. They're happening everywhere.
Well, that's an amazing. We kind of think that environmental issues are subject to that we are in America are the only ones who are thinking about it. We tend to be self-deprecating here. So let's talk a little bit about in our last few minutes here. We only have about 8 minutes to go. What kinds of things? How would you sum up high-performance schools and integrated learning systems for our audience?
I think high-performance schools are schools wherein we pay attention to the energy, nutrient, and material flows that go through those buildings, Daria, and how they impact the communities and the other systems that support them. And in the layperson sense, that's about the things we're most familiar with: energy conservation, interior air quality, total environmental systems, waste stream management, and those are fairly well known at this point, and I personally believe fairly well accepted. Although, as you said, change is slow, and there's a lot of momentum integrated into the system. The things that I am more interested in, however, and I know you share these interests, is how then can we use the school environment, the built environment, as an extension of the curriculum. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we spend 80 to 90% of our time inside buildings. Our buildings are really the environments that impact us. Our schools, unfortunately, even given the great dignity of some of our wonderful schools and some of our better urban schools, even, we really have lost track, I think, of the role that our buildings can play in the act of educating. What can buildings teach us about things like the hydrological cycle, or gravity, or solar geometry, or daylighting, and so forth? What do we need to do to our physical environments so that we can change out technologies and adapt learning systems? How can we integrate the activities of children in the community beyond the schoolyard or the school fence, whatever the case may be, and have them be better citizens? I agree also very strongly with something you said earlier about, hey, we can't teach sustainable design as this singular, detached, sort of freak subject. We have to integrate environmental issues in the curriculum. We have to teach students about how the built environment impacts their well-being, so that, and this is really my goal, so that when someone graduates from high school, they go on to college or out into the world having a full appreciation of what the environment means, both the natural environment and the built environment, and what it means to their well-being and so forth. And to that end, high-performance green schools are facilities and school systems that enable school students to graduate and be more cognizant of their surroundings, better stewards of the environment, and it arms them in ways that they can prosper and really go on to be better citizens, having had a grasp or a handle on all those things combined. And to that end, I'm sure you're aware, Daria, the built environment, in terms of integrating all these things, really is the catalyst. It's the cauldron wherein all these things are blended, and that's what high-performance schools try to do.
Well, I'm certainly glad to know that there are many people out there who concur with the philosophical premise of integrated systems, that what we teach in our schools as separate entities of themselves need to have a direction in terms of being a part of everyday life for our students in order for them to understand their importance and how to integrate them in the school sense, and in life sense, actually, not
Indeed.
Just in school sense. Finally, how would you consider telling our audience about helping them to develop things like this in their own communities? What kinds of advice would you give them?
Well, the short answer, and I'm sure you've heard it before, Daria, is to just educate yourself and become aware of what's being done. Ironically, that's becoming harder instead of simpler in some ways. In that, the last time I checked on the internet, for instance, there were 40,000 hits on green building, and green schools were buried in those 40,000 hits. So, at the same time, there are specific organizations like the Alliance to Save Energy, like the Human Ecology Action League, like the American Institute of Architects Committee on the Environment, U.S. Green Building Council.
Whoa. Start over again and say them slower.
Okay. The American Institute of Architects Committee on the Environment, the U.S. Green Building Council is very interested in healthy schools. The Alliance to Save Energy is very interested in healthy green schools. Rebuild America, Daria, specifically is interested in green schools. Here in Pittsburgh, it would be someone like a CCI, or in any other community. I know that there are nonprofit organizations that are community-based in almost every major city that have green schools at heart. And the first step then would be to find out from these sources, whether they're on the internet or in the local papers or in the local phone book, frankly, what and who in your own community is involved with the issues of schools, healthy schools, green schools, integrated learning systems, as you suggest. Beyond which, I would suggest whatever articles and books you've written. If you haven't suggested them on your radio show in the past, I'd certainly refresh the memories and the resource list of your listeners. But also, I have great respect for people like Janie Chase, Blueprint for a Green School, all of Doris Rapp's work, The Impossible Child, Sherry Rogers in environmental illness.
Bob,
we could take it chapter by chapter by topic.
Do me a favor. You talk so quickly. I know that a lot of our listening audience, because they call and ask for those names again and those books. Read them again. Janie Chase. What was the name of the book?
Janie Chase, Blueprint for a Green School.
Okay.
Doris Rapp. That's R-A-P-P. If you know Doris, she's written 2 wonderful books, The Impossible Child, and her other one is This Your Child? Anything by Sherry Rogers, who is a physician in Syracuse, New York, the chemical sensitivities, Prescription for the 21st Century, where she deals with environmental illness in schools and so forth and kids, are good sources. Any materials, Daria, that's coming out of the Alliance to Save Energy, which is D.C.-based, as you know, and has an interest in green schools, that's the Alliance to Save Energy. And these folks all have websites and all have phone numbers. Another one would be Rebuild America. We're doing a lot of nice work, a lot of good projects with Rebuild America, which is also D.C.-based but has other chapters.
Do you have any phone numbers for those?
Gee, I wish I do. I don't have them in front of me. I could fax them to you and you could share them with your audience, but I'd have to look them up for you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The other one is the American Institute of Architects in D.C., who have specific information that they give out on green schools.
All right. And we cannot tell you, this is a tremendous amount of information for our listening audience. We greatly appreciate it. You have been listening to Bob Kobert, who is with the Conservation Consultants Incorporated at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have been talking about green schools. If you'd like any information regarding our broadcast today or copies of any of our tapes, you can call us at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877 toll-free PRO-KIDS. Or you can email us at PRO-KIDS, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. That's PRO-KIDS at rlc.net. And we'd like to thank you for joining us. If you'd like to contact Bob Kobert, you can at his number, 412-431-4449, at extension 225. That's 412-431-4449. extension 225. His name is Bob Kobert, Kobert. Bob, thank you again for joining us today. We greatly appreciate everything you've done.
You're welcome, Daria. And I want to tell you, I love the name of your show, Children Come First. In Pittsburgh, the school board starts every single meeting with the words, "We're here for the children, let's get to work." And I think that's what we should do.
Thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too.
Join us again next week for Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski when we're talking about issues regarding our children. Have a great week. Thank you.